Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 190. Tonight is Tes-Yud Kislev, which is both the birthday and the Yortzeit histalkus and Hilula of the Mitteler Rebbe, 190 years ago. Kates Shonim, 190. Passed away in Tovkuf Peiches at the age of 52. And I think it's appropriate to begin with that, since this is Chassidus Applied. And the Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, was, of course, Bina of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chassidus Chabad, is Chochma of Chassidus, Chochma, the Nekuda. So his Teres and Chassidus is written far more concentrated. And the Mitteler Rebbe, the Chevas Hanor, expanded into Bina. And you see that for every one page of the Alter Rebbe, you see 10 pages of the Mitteler Rebbe approximately. The Bina and the Sachvus and the spreading of Chassidus in the fullest and expansive way. So Chassidus Applied would not exist were it not for, of course, the Miyazdim, the Miyasid of Chassidus Chabad and the Nesir B'Sein Nesirenu that followed, the Mitteler Rebbe, of course, afterwards the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Nishmosei Eden, the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and our Rebbe, Dera Shvi. So tonight we focus on the Mitteler Rebbe. Though all the Rabbeim are like one, as the Rebbe says in a number of places, but especially in the Sikha of Actually, the Sikha of Yud Kislev, Shabbos Parshas Vayishlach, Yud Kislev, Tov Shin Yud, the Rebbe said, he was asked why it says on the Sharblat, on the cover page of all Kahos Svarim of the Rabbeim, it says Shalshelis Ha'oir, which means the chain of light. When the Rebbe is Amoir, he's a source of light. The Church says Shalshelis Amoir, not Oir. Oir is just light. Light is only the reflection, is only an expression of the source. And the Rebbe said, because in Amoyer, in Etzem, in Ishtokin, Ishtalkus. In the essence, in the Moyer itself, there's no Ishtalkus, there's no Shalshelis, there's no chain. It's all one thing. In their expression, there's a difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek, as we know in the Spheres, Chochme, Bina, Das, the first three Rabbeim, Chassidic Chabad, then Netzach is the Rebbe Marash. Here's not the place to discuss why do we skip Chesed Gvura Teferes, but Netzach, excuse me, Netzach is the Rebbe Marash, and Hoyd is the Rebbe Rashab. Yisod is Yosef, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and Malchus, the Shvi, the seventh of the spheres of the emotions, and of Zoh, of the Midas, is the Rashvi, the Rebbe. The practical reason why we do, just since I mentioned it already, is because Nihi is the expression, is usually the implementation and actualization of Chagas, of Chesed Gvura Teferes, which is more an emotional level. Regardless, the bottom line is that it's really one etzem, but in Oyer there's a difference. So we're talking now about the Oyer of the Mitteler Rebbe, and really it's like the Shar, the gate through which all the Rabbeim travel on a night like this. And Tes-Yud Kislev goes right into Yud Kislev, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Mitteler Rebbe in Tovkuf Pei Zayin. The year before the histalkus, the Mitteler Rebbe came out of prison. And that is one of the reasons that the Yud Kislev was not immediately celebrated, because the first year of Yud Kislev was a day after the histalkus. So the real simcha and their celebrations began the next year and the years later. So there's a very interesting reshima that was printed about the histalkus of the Mitteler Rebbe, that I'm looking at something that I have from Kopir, meaning something was published still in a photostat of typed words. Later it's been printed in my Morim of the Mitteler Rebbe, but I don't recall where this is printed, if it's printed anywhere, but it's printed in this little booklet. It gives a description of the Mitteler Rebbe's last histalkus. I want to just go over it briefly, because it's very moving and a good description, and of course fitting to where we are now, especially now that we're 190 years, and then from the histalkus and the Hilula, and then discuss its application, Chassidus Applied, to our lives today, 190 years later. So he says he brings some Beis Rebbe. Beis Rebbe is a famous sefer that was written in over 100 years ago, that the Mitteler Rebbe, after he came out of Meiser, out of prison, that was of course Yud Kislev, Tovkuf Pei Zayin, he remained in Hadich for the Yom Neroim, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He was in Hadich. Hadich is the place where the oil of the Alter Rebbe is. For the year Tovkuf Peiches, he was in Hadich, and several times he would go to the oil, to the father's, to the Alter Rebbe's oil, and people would gather from all over, and he would speak Chassidus in the Beis HaMedrash, which was right near the oil. Once he went to be mishtatech, which means to prostrate himself over the kever of the Alter Rebbe, of the Eil, and spent a lot of time there. And then he came out b'simcha rabba with great joy and said, I finally was able to convince my father that I could be free from Rabbanus, meaning free from leadership. The Anash, when they heard that, they thought that meant he's going to Eretz Yisrael. So they said, Rebbe, why are you speaking such a way? Why are you leaving us alone here without a Reya, without a shepherd? And the Mitteler Rebbe said, I'm leaving you with my son-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek, Harav Agon Ram Nachem Mendel Sheyichya, that's how he called him. He will be for you a Reya Neman, a faithful shepherd. So they didn't really understand yet what his message was. But then it says from there he went back home, and was on his traveling back home from after the Yom Naraim, and he remained in Niazhin, which is a city which, and there he became ill until the point that the doctors could not find anything to heal him from his illness. They also warned him not to say Chassidus at all, which was actually something that gave him life and was terribly painful for him not to refrain from saying Chassidus. And the illness went on till Tes-Yud Kislev of that year, Tovkuf Peches. As the illness grew, and he was literally lying in bed and could not move, very weak physically, but he insisted to say Chassidus. And as it got closer in Kislev, in the days of Kislev, he stood up with a flaming face, and a nash gathered till it filled up his house where he was. And at that time, the Mitteler Rebbe said something on the Shavua Zeh, the week before his passing. He said the last Maimer he would say, well, he said a Maimer, it's not the last. The last Maimer he would say a Maimer, Al Hoven Inyan Lekichis Anshe Chayil, because then was a big Zeta that the Tsar was drafting young Jews to go into the army. So this is what the Mitteler Rebbe spoke of and what it means Beruchnius. We'll talk about it in a few moments. What the kavanah of is Lamaila, what the Ruchnius, the Kinyan of this Gzeira, which was to draft Jews into the army, which of course was a terrible Gzeira because they usually did not come back, and it was for lifetime and all the other tzaras that it led to. On the night of Tes Kislev, this Shema continues. The night of Tes Kislev, like tonight, became very tired. A number of times, and a nash gathered in his home. The Chassidim gathered in his home again, and he asked that they dress him up in white garment, in a white shirt. And the way they looked at him, they saw when dressed him in white. He was like dressed and wrapped in white. He looked like a malach Hashem tzvokis, like a malach, like an angel. And he said, tonight, he told the Chassidim, tonight there should be simcha, because simcha, joy, sweetens the dinim, it sweetens the severities. And he prepared himself to say Dach, Chassidus. The whole house filled up with light and joy. And everybody who was there felt that the Mitteler Rebbe came back to his full strength. That's how it appeared, because the house filled up with light and joy. And then he said, Darash Gimel Ponim, he said 3 times, he said a Maimer, seems like 3 Maimorim, on the Pasuk Achrei Havaya Telechu, and the 3rd time on the pasuk Zecher Rav Tufcha, which is printed in the Mitteler Rebbe's, the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, which is the Mitteler Rebbe published, and it was Mitteler Rebbe prepared for publication. V'darash be'islavus, he delivered the Maimer be'islavus with passion, with fiery passion, till the morning, and then he asked if the dawn has yet broken. His son Harav Menachem Nochem, the son of the Mitteler Rebbe, one of his sons, in his introduction to Teres Chaim is a sefer of the Mitteler Rebbe, on the Mamorim of Bereshis and Shmois, we have Teres Chaim, writes that he commanded me, he told me, my father, the Mitteler Rebbe, told me that moment, I see that I will not live to the same amount of years as my parents did. And he says, my son will set at the same time that I was born. which of course is also Tes Kislev, the birthday. And he says, and he continues writing, that the writings of my father, the Mitteler Rebbe, is called Teres Chaim. Chaim Hem L'Mitzayin. There'll be a life to all those that draw from it, that all those that learn in it. That should be a schus, the Mitteler Rebbe said, for me, and the schus harabim, that everyone who learns it and it illuminates, their lives will illuminate my neshama as they learn it down below. And then he says that we saw niflois, we saw wonders that came from my father, meaning the Mitteler Rebbe, as his spirit and his neshama began to leave his body and elevate and return. He doesn't describe what he saw exactly, but he says, we saw as his keiches weakened, we saw literally the gashmi is so-called being stripped, but we saw in his mouth as he was whispering, he was speaking Chassidus, and with all kinds of different names. He's using Shemus Agdeshim, obviously. And he began to speak Dvarim Atikim v'Nifloim, which means Atikim, ancient insights and wondrous ones. And you saw it was not Beruche, it was not his own spirit, it was the Ruach Hashem spoke through him, through this fire, this flaming fire. I'm literally translating what the Mitteler Rebbe's son, Rabbi Menachem Nochem, writes. And then, due to the natural heat and fever that he was going through, you could hear you could only hear the sound coming, a very gentle and subtle sound, until he finished and he came to the pasuk, Kimokar Chaim Chaya HaChaim, the source of life and the life of all life. He was unable to finish that sentence. As he finished that sentence, his neshama went back to Mekeme Beginze Meremim, elevated to Hashem. And he uses the same expression as Rashbi, Bechat Katiris Katarna, that he was bound up in the flame and the fire and the bind above in heaven. The ninth day of Kislev, Tovkuf Peches, the day he was born, and the day that fulfilled 54 years. I mentioned 52, 54 years since he was born. And in him was fulfilled the pasuk as Mispri Yemecha Amale, that the days of your Mispri Yemecha, the number of your days will be filled, which talks about tzaddikim who pass away the same day that they're born, so it's like a complete cycle. He was brought to the Eil in the Yezhin, and that's where he is. In this same booklet, there's also a hesped, interestingly, from Rabbi Avram Avli, Av Bezdin Kedesh and Cherson, that he gave for the Mitteler Rebbe on Chof Aleph Kislev, which would be 9 to 12 days later that year. If anybody wants to get this information, please email us at meaningfullife.com. You could email us info@meaningfullife.com, and I could send you a copy of all of this, of what I just read from the Hebrew. As far as the Maimah that he said, it's fascinating that literally when the Mitteler Rebbe was literally coming to the end of his Chaim Chayusi Ba'al Medain, of all things he was saying a Maimah was on the Gzeira that was happening then. And there's a Rishima about that as well that discusses that he was obviously concerned, deeply concerned, and it says that his father had told him that the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe said this Maimer, he said, when he started the Maimer, he says, when I was at the oil of my father, before 7 years ago, I saw a Kitra Godel, a great Gzeira, a great decree that will be on the from the enemies of the Jews on our Bochrim, on our children. And then he thought for a while that it may have gone away because he saw young people coming, but the Gzeira was still there. The Alter Rebbe let him know, and he says this Maimer, and he talks a fascinating Maimer about Gzeiras, and especially bringing a medrash. And I'll just, since it's Tes Kislev, I'll just chazer one mekudah, one point. He brings a medrash that says that says the pasuk Baruch Deimededi Litzvi Ma'atzvi Kashuberech Machzer Eshel Acherov. So it says Deimededi Litzvi, which means my beloved is compared to a tzvi, to a deer. And just like a deer, when it runs, it looks back. So too Hashem is compared to a tzvi, to a deer, that even when he runs away, which means even in Golus, he still looks back, and we have a connection with him. And he asked the question, how could you say such a thing in the Eibishter running away? So he talks about, of course, that we're not talking about the etzem of the Eibishter, we're talking about the Giluyim, that God, in his manifestation, Golus is a concealment. And even when there's a concealment, which means the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and the Shechanti B'Seichem was no longer there physically, we still have him looking back at us, so we still have a connection to his gaze. And how does that manifest? That there's 248 mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, of which, as he puts it, he says, 161 were no longer physically possible after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But Pei Zayin, 87 of them still remain with us. And that's God looking back at us. That even though there's the concealment of the 161, nevertheless, the 87 remain with us, so we still have that connection of mitzvah, tzavsa v'chibur, a connection even in the darkest times. He goes on to explain that even this 87 at a time where from the Midrash's mashma that he's running away, and then he looks back. That means there was a time that even the 87 weren't there, so he explains, because right after the Chum Beis HaMikdash, there's Avelis. When you're sitting in grief and Avelis, you're potter from all mitzvahs. But then they will return, because after the Avelis they return, so we still have that connection. It's a fascinating mimer. It talks about basically how we still connect to God even in the darkest of times, which referring and hinting to the Gzeira, this decree of the young Jews being drafted in the Tsar's army, that in that itself creates a deeper thirst and a deeper hunger to be able to reconnect. Then he talks about at the end about Mashiach's times, that Yizbaro v'Yislabna Advarim, that the ultimate bitter will be when we'll recognize and see the Seini Yisrael for what they are, when we'll see the true non-believers and the haters, because as long as they're mixed together and you don't really see they're mixed together with tzaddikim, the bitter is not, because you can't tell and distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Once you see that, and through a tzaddik who completely represents complete purification, so by stark contrast, you can see those that are not that way, and that leads straight to the Geula, as he explains at the end there, how the Apakursim in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, they became obvious. So when we see things that sometimes are obvious, it may on one hand look like it's a darkness, but in truth it's a clarity that we're achieving. You can say the Mitteler Rebbe is actually hinting to his own histalkus, because as histalkus he came to that place, Chaim, as I mentioned, Chad Katiris Katana, a purity, a completion of the whole cycle of his own life, from Tes Kislev to Tes Kislev, that itself would be a so-called a tikkun, a repair and an antidote to the gzeiras that were coming in during that time. So it's just a fascinating insight to the Mitteler Rebbe, what a Rebbe is about, what he's thinking about in the last minutes of his life, or the last days of his life. And then, of course, the other Maimorim we mentioned before, which some of them we have, and we need to do more research to see where they are. The one Zecher Av Tufcha I mentioned is in Siddur. So it's interesting to see what it discusses there. It discusses there, if you look into the difference in Eir, Etzem, Ispashtas, the different relationships between Eir and Gilead and Helem, Etzem and Ispashtas, Keich and Peil, and Yesh Ma'ayin, which is a famous discussion in Ayin Beis and other places that discuss this at length. But that's not for now. So suffice it to say that as we stand now, 190 years later, what's 190? Ketz Som LaCheshach. This Cheshach that the Mitteler Rebbe was talking about, thank God those Gzeiros were over. As the Mitteler Rebbe writes elsewhere, Lo Yeh, we won't have any more Gzeiros as they were at the times of Tach v'Tat, the time of the Arizal. The Rebbe explains this is not for now as well. There was a Holocaust, but bottom line today, we no longer will have any more such darkness. So in 190 years later, Ketzom L'Cheshach, everything that the Mitteler Rebbe said then, obviously is even more relevant today. Today we see the blessings that we have, that we thank God do not have the Gzeiros and Shmodis, all the terrible decrees and the oppression that the Jews suffered in those years. And the Rebbe's Nesias, when he started Tafshin Yud, we have actually physical freedom to the point you can send your children to any Jewish school, you can practice Yiddishkeit as much as you wish. All those halamas v'asterim, all those darkness and decrees don't exist, but we still have the Golos. So 190 years later, you can say is a ketz, is in a sense it's a ketz, Kuf Tzadik is 190, and end to that, we should be zeich already, as the Mitteler Rebbe says in this Maimer, should be completely Yizbaru v'Yislabna Advarim, where we see today all kinds of terrible things, but it's revealing. It's like when you cook the pot and the grime starts coming out from the pores, that's a revelation that is a sign that we're getting to a point of total clarity of what is right and what is wrong, instead of it all being snowballed together where we can't distinguish between the two. And of course the lesson to us in the learning of Chassidus is that without Bina of Chassidus, Mitteler Rebbe, as the Rebbe explains in the Sikh of Vayetze Tovshin Mem Zayin, where he talks about Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev, that the Geula of the Mitteler Rebbe as to Tes-Yud Kislev, the Tes-Yud Kislev was the Geula of Chassidus, the Kitrug Chassidus. He says that the Geula of Tes-Yud Kislev is about Rebbe and Chassid, and also on the Srachvus, on the expansion of Chassidus, which is the real kavan, your futsu, my nesecha. My nesecha, mayon, is like a nekud of chokhmah. But your futsu is the spreading of the well springs outward. That was what the Mitteler Rebbe did, the Cheves Hanar, the expansion of the river that takes from the Mayan, the Tipa, which is the concentrated source of water, and spreads it out in every possible way. So the lesson to us, of course, is applying Chassidus, meaning taking Chassidus and spreading it out in every possible way in our own personal lives, that it should permeate and refine every aspect of our characters, every aspect of our personalities, spreading also to our home lives and homes and families, spreading to our work and everywhere and everyone we come in contact with. And that's how we, through concentric circles, we spread Chassidus in a way that makes it applicable and relevant to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives. That is how we celebrate and we honor the Mitteler Rebbe and the Teres Chaim that he wants us to learn, meaning the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus, which of course today we have all the Rabbeim, especially the Rabbeim afterwards, who come and explain the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus in a way that we can actually implement and apply it to our personal lives in Avodas Hashem, in every aspect of our lives. In Tov Shalamet Ches, 40 years ago, when the Rebbe had the heart attack, which of course is another cheshach, another form of Gzeira, and then of course we saw what came out of it, exactly that point, a deeper power and even more double and triple and unprecedented growth that followed. So the Rebbe actually began chazing a lot of my morim from the Mitteler Rebbe in that kufa in Tov Shalamet Ches. How to explain it? Many explanations, but Vayetze, 40 years ago, the Rebbe actually said the Maimer V'Shafti B'Shalom was one of the longest Maimorim the Rebbe ever said. If I recall, it was over an hour and a half, and it was reminiscent of the Mitteler Rebbe's style, which was Harchov, length and breadth, which is the whole concept of Bina as opposed to in the context of Chochmah. So they come together, Chochmah, Bina, Trei, Rein, Leim, Espashan, two friends that can't be separated, because Bina complements and embellishes and fleshes out the Nekudus of Chochmah of the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. So that is some words about Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev and the lessons applied. Of course, this is the month of Kislev, so it's filled with Yom Tovim, Chassidish Yom Tovim, which can then conclude with Chanukah. So we also move now into Yudalit Kislev. Next Shabbos will be the Rebbe's and the Rebbetzins anniversary, Tofresh Pei Tes. So we're now in Tofshin Ayin Ches. So essentially, we're beginning the 90th year from the beginning of the 90th year since the wedding. The wedding was Yudal Kislev Tofresh Pei Tes. So Tofshin Ayin Tes will be technically 90, and Tofshin Pei Tes will be 100. So 90 years, again, a tzaddik, in a way that you could say that the Mitteler Rebbe's histalkus, the Rebbe's wedding and the marriage was almost 100 years, the beginning of the 100th year from the Mitteler Rebbe's yahrzeit. So in that context, what we could say is, the Rebbe said about the Yudal Kislev, that does the tog, was zugibun mir mit eich. This is the day that connected you and I, and I with you. And let us make sure that it yields the right peiros tevis, it should yield the right fruits of the labor. Because this is the day when the Rebbe married the Rebbetzin, of course, technically, and Gashmis was the day that the Rebbe became the son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and as such became, and ultimately would become the successor in Tofshin Yud, after Yud Shvat, Tofshin Yud, the histalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe assuming leadership. So Yudal Kislev has a special meaning in that sense. The Rebbe then chazed the Mendy Chodedi, which was the Maimer that the Rebbe, this is Tofshin Yudalid. This was 25 years, Tofshin Yudalid was 25 years, Pei Tes, Tzadik Tes, Tofshin Tes, 25 years from Tofresh Pei Tes. So the Rebbe has a Fabrengen, he chazed l'chodedi that the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe said at the Rebbe's wedding, among other Maimorim, and with a sophists and additions, and later edited it. So that became, so Yudal Kislev is a day that's a significant day as the Rebbe's leadership. Ein Melech b'lei matronisa, Melech, the king and the queen. There's a union. We saw it in Tofshin Mem Ches after the histalkus of the Rebbetzin. The Rebbe spoke about it in a very emotional way. You could see that the connection to the Rebbetzin was not just technical, but it was actually part and parcel of what Nesius means. So when it comes to Untitled Kislev, we recommemorate, we revisit, and we commemorate, and we relive the same idea of that connection. And that connection is the connection of Lamayla, it's Yichud Zun, Yichud Zoh and Malchus, the Yichud of a Melech and the Queen, of Zoh and Malchus. And Lamata, it's the Yichud of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, meaning that they become one, and that becomes the power that gives birth to Tel Desein Shel Sadikim is Maisim Tevim, the good deeds, and all the Talmidim and all Talmides, all the students and boys and girls, young men and women, which are considered those that you teach, become your students, as the Rebbe made it very clear in the bracha that he would give Erev Yom Kippur, that the students are his children. So what is the day of Tes-Yud Kislev? Is essentially the marriage that yields and gives birth to all of us. So I think it's self-understood that this is a day where we have to reconnect and intensify our connection with the Rebbe and what he expects of us, what he expects of his children, and what the Rebbetzin expects of his children, and that is to live up to the directives and learn the Torah and implement the directives of the Rebbe in our personal lives. This again is applying Chassidus in our personal lives, in the way we reach others, and of course it all leads to what it says in Chassidus and Medrash and Chassidus, that the ultimate marriage between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be with the Gula Amitis Vashlema. Matan Torah is called Chiyim Chasanose, that's the Edison, as the beginning of the marriage. And the complete marriage will be with the Gula Amitis Vashlema and the redemption, the final redemption, when there'll be the total union between heaven and earth, between the marriage between heaven and earth, and between HaKadosh Baruch Hu with God and the people. A world where there'll be a dira b'tachtenim, and not just a dira, not just a home where a husband and wife dwell together, but also a garden. Basi Ligani, a garden, a beautiful home. One that has full of pleasure and full of delight. As the Rebbe explains in the famous Sikh of Chav Beishvat Tov Shenun Beis, in this, where he speaks about how the Rebbetzin, how the Isha, as not just a dira, not just a home, but it should be a dira, not a beautiful home, like hinted to in the name Chaya Mushka, a home filled with vitality. Life Chaya and Mushka come from the muscat, from a beautiful aroma, the spices of the Mushak, and the Mushka is as explained in that talk. And of course, Vayishlach is Yaakov sending Malachim, whether it's Malachim Mamish, is sending shluchim, which is exactly this message. The Rebbe is sending shluchim to go conquer the world and see what is the world like, and trying to appease the world or transform it, as ultimately happens with Esav. Esav represents Edom, which is the nations of the world, and particularly the nation of the Golus Edom, this final Golus, the Golus of Rome, of the Western world. Edom, Esav ze Edom, Edom ze Esav. And that is the birur of the final steps, the final last birurim, final refinement of everything. And though the Rebbe says that everything's been refined, but we still have to open our eyes to accept and assimilate it and acclimate ourselves to that reality. So Vayishlach, the whole Parsha Vayishlach, was the reconciliation of Yaakov and Esav, which the Rebbe explains in a number of sichos, especially Vayeshev Tov Shenun Beis as well, the Tov Shenun Beis, how it represents the nations of the world. The Alter Rebbe first opposing Esav, first opposing that the Tzarfas should win the battle, because Tzarfas would create an assimilation that, even though physically it may be easier for the Jews, but it would be Gashmis, much physically very difficult, but Baruchnius, it would be more intact. Whereas if Alexander wins, the Gashmis would be, if Alexander wins, the Gashmis would be more difficult and the Ruchnis would be more intact. Whereas if Napoleon wins, as is written in the Alter Rebbe's famous letter, and Barich is the Mitteler Rebbe's letter to Moshe Meisels, where he writes about how Napoleon represents the klipa of this world, the yeshus of Kechev Eitzim Yodi, that I'm self-made. That if he won, it would be physically easier for the Jews, but spiritually it would be a tremendous compromise. But today, after years, we are able to conquer and able to enter Tzarfas and enter the Western world and enter the world of Esav, and not only avoid it, but be able to transform it. So all this comes together in the theme of what our time is all about today. We are here in almost 90 years, in the beginning of the 90th year from the wedding of the Rebbe, and 190 years from the histalkus of the Mitteler Rebbe, all indicating to leading us to what our mission is, which is to take Chassidus, to spread Chassidus everywhere possible. But spreading is not just a quantitative thing, it's a qualitative thing. Spreading meaning permeating, that Chassidus affects our lives personally, addresses our personal challenges, that's when you know that Chassidus is really living. If you have challenges in life, you have difficulties, or even if you have good things, and Chassidus doesn't speak to that, God forbid, then Chassidus could be a very nice, theoretical, abstract idea. The goal and the purpose of it is that it should actually change our lives, should help us improve our lives and grow in the areas that we're struggling with, in the areas that we're looking to grow. And that's, of course, the whole objective of this program, which is Chassidus Applied, to do that and help answer questions, take questions, and hopefully this is a good opportunity for you to announce that we have a whole section on our website, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, a forum where you can submit any question. Nothing is off limits. You can write comments, you can add things, you can add sources or things that we discuss or ideas that have not been discussed, as well as archives of now 189 episodes. We're now in the 190th. 190 with the Mitteler Rebbe. Yes, it's everything's Ashgacha Pratis, and as well as the essays that have been submitted for the past 3 years. The essays, the beautiful essays that come in from people who were submitted by people from all walks of life, applying Chassidus to a real contemporary challenge in a most beautiful and relevant way. And I will be reading some essays as well at the end of this program. Okay, so we covered the basic time that we're in and some of its lessons. Let's go to some specific questions. So here's a question about what is the Rebbe's opinion about ultrasound? I was listening to a recent podcast of yours that spoke about the Rebbe's opinion on keeping a pregnancy quiet. I was wondering what the Rebbe's opinion on ultrasounds during pregnancy and how it applies today. Thank you. Okay, good question. So I did my due diligence and did some research. I asked around to try to find some actual answers. I mean, I was always aware of the Rebbe's general position, but there's nothing like actually seeing and writing the Rebbe's answers. And I did indeed find 4 answers from the Rebbe, and I will read them to you. But before I do, I will just sum them up. Generally speaking, the Rebbe's belief and the Rebbe's opinion is that to do ultrasound for no particular reason, just because doctors want to do it, what the Rebbe says is just mevalbel, there's no reason. I'm quoting the Rebbe directly here. Someone writes to the Rebbe that a woman age 40, the doctors wanted her to go through to do some pregnancy tests to see if the fetus is viable and healthy, and she's asking whether to do it, and the Rebbe writes l'may nafka question mark, exclamation point. Ke'etzes rav meire hira. So let's break this down into 2 parts. L'may nafka, because what difference does it make? Well, are you going to act on something? Chaz v'shalom. So why be mevalbel yourself? As he writes in another answer, in Chov Gimel Shvat Tavshinun Beis, the father of a chassan wrote to the Rebbe and said, today, my daughter-in-law is in a state of, is pregnant, and it's possible there are twins, and they therefore want to make an ultrasound to know for sure if they're twins. Should we make an ultrasound? And the Rebbe writes, there's no difference right now, practical difference, so why be mevalbel, why confuse matters? Askir al-Tziyah. So it's interesting, both of them, l'may nafka, that's about twins, and this one is in general because she's 40 years old. And here he does say, Rav Meir Heira. I'm not going to read the interpretations where the Rebbe is saying his opinion is not, but if you really want a so-called halachic opinion, go to a Rav Meir Heira. But any Rav that respects the Rebbe, of course, is going to hear that, is obviously going to take the Rebbe's guidance. So perhaps the Rebbe wanted the Rav to confirm it from a halachic point of view. Because in case, of course, there's always a situation of pekuach nefesh, and that question is about a 40-year-old woman, so pekuach nefesh is a different story, as we'll soon see from another answer. If it's a matter of just finding out if it's twins, or if the child will be healthy, why be mevalbel? You're not going to do anything anyway about it. That's the Rebbe's opinion. The reason I suggest maybe Meirei, because in case of pekuach nefesh, danger to the mother, then it's another story. Then pekuach nefesh changes everything. So those are the 2 answers. As far as the twins goes, there the Rebbe doesn't write to go to Meirei because why nafka? Why confuse it? He said, there's twins. Again, we're not talking here a dangerous situation. to the mother or to the children. We're talking just to be aware, just to confirm the fact. And there's another answer. This answer here, the Rebbe says to do it. But here clearly, he says, goes like the question that's asked to the Rebbe is that my wife is now in her 8th month of pregnancy. Around 3 months ago, the doctors thought that the birth is earlier than was expected, and therefore he wants to do a sonogram. And meanwhile, we pushed it off, and since then he hasn't said anything. Yesterday, my wife was again by the doctor, and he said, according to what he feels, what he senses and what he observes, there's a chashash, there's a chashash, a possibility for twins. And he said, but Kifus insists that you have to immediately do a sonogram. Now here clearly from the tone of it, there could be danger involved because of the premature and so on. So the Rebbe is asking the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, Lokach hasonogram, you should make it. And crosses out oiloi, which was maybe not, and he crosses that out. And then they're asking for a bracha. And again, the distinction is very clear. If you talk about Pekuach Nefesh and a doctor orders it for that reason, but if it's just to know things, information, then what's the reason? What do you need the bilbil for? And finally, one more answer that I'll cite here. Actually, one second. I cited so far 2. Yeah, 3 actually. And the 4th one is that since lately, this is Tov Shemem Tes, the 6th day of Chanukah. Since lately there's a pressure by doctors to check on an ongoing basis, twice at least during pregnancy with a sonogram, they're asking the Rebbe his adracha. This is coming from Hanola of Neshei B'nei Chabad Kvar Chabad. So this is a collective question by the Hanola of the Neshei B'nei Chabad and the Rebbe answers on Hey Tevis Tov Shemem Tes. Kehiros Rabbonim, you should follow the directive of the Rabbonim in Eretz Yisrael. Ubavade lo tishaleno eid apam ve'eid apam. And certainly you shouldn't ask again and again. Now, what does this mean? Because since the Rebbe may be not al-Asar, but regardless, Rabbonim have to look at it from the point of view exactly the same thing. If it's Pekuach Nefesh, Rabbonim have to determine that, if it's dangerous. If it's not, then like the Rebbe writes, not b'mavalbul. So it's essentially in the same context of the other answers. If anybody has other answers that I have not read, that may help, or even if even additional ones that I have not read, please send them in to me, and I'll be for the Tevis Arabim, the Schus Arabim. I'll be able to read them and share them with everyone. So therefore we have a pretty clear directive as far as it goes. To sum it up, that if there's no issue of danger and no a doctor concerned with that, I'm not talking about doctors just saying it's a matter of procedure. If it's danger part, then you go with it. I mean, you should ask a Rav to make sure. If it's no danger, it's just information purposes, to know whether it's twins or it's a boy or girl or other things, or because they consider a procedure, why minaf kamina, why be mavalbal, what's the need for it? Okay. I have seen, as far as other tests that are done, that are not, ultrasound is done through sound and through the sound waves. There are other tests that are done a little more intrusive, and they're clearly, I have not seen the answer, but I remember seeing that the Rebbe said there, you actually can put to danger someone if you stick a needle in or you take out some fluid, even though it's procedurally done, the Rebbe the same thing, unless it's danger. If it's not, just for information purposes or procedural, no need to go and do anything that's unnecessary. Okay, let's move on. Next question. Should I have a relationship with my non-Jewish children from the past? So this is talking about a situation where somebody who was married, if you call it married, was in relationship with someone, had children with a non-Jewish woman, and those children are not Jewish, of course. Now this person is no longer in that relationship. The children exist. He's moved on and become a frum Jew, he's married, has new children, and so on. So there's the halachic aspects, which I always talk about. I'm not here to paskin as a rabbi regarding this matter. The halachic aspects, do you have an actual relationship halachically with non-Jewish children? Even though they are biologically your children and they come from your seed, as far as the father goes, do you have a relationship? If it's a mother There's always a relationship because the children are Jewish, the mother is Jewish, even if the father, God forbid, is not. But in this instant, there may not be a biological, but then there's a thing called menschlichkeit, and there's a thing called chil Hashem, there's a thing called nuach to be a certain etiquette and a certain menschlichkeit. What's the menschlichkeit here? If you have children look for their parents. To ignore them and cut off from children is what be the reason for that? So you have to find a way, and I would suggest definitely find a way to connect with these children. If you have been estranged from them or you haven't been around them for a long time, find a way to contact them. There may be anger involved, there may be all kinds of different things, a lot of water under the bridge, but nevertheless, there is an element because children will seek out their parent. And I see it as a healthy thing for there to be a connection. Now, they're not Jewish. That doesn't mean you have to throw it in their face, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be a menschliche relationship. Maybe even a financial one, maybe other things. I'm not talking about necessarily from obligation point of view, but from a point of view of healthy approach and healthy attitude. In addition, this is not about judgment, what you did back then, whether it was right or wrong. The fact is that Hashgacha Pratis, children were born from your seed. I'm talking about as a father. And as such, there is some type of obligation, a moral obligation is what I would say, instead of putting it a halachic obligation, a legal one. And the moral obligation is also from an emotional and psychological point of view. I have seen that fathers who do that, it's a relief for them because they always carry it. Even if you so-called cut off, but you always carry, you know their children are out there. And those children have children. So having a cordial relationship is definitely recommended in my opinion. And if children don't want to have the relationship, so that's another question, how do you deal with that? How much do you insist? But at least reaching out for sure is something that's commendable. I have not seen something from the Rebbe directly about this. And again, if somebody has something from the Rebbe or has something from other Sfarim that I may be missing or there's a different approaches to it, I would definitely want to see or hear it. And I'd be happy to share that as well. This is what makes sense to me from the spirit of Torah and Chassidus, the spirit of Torah and Chassidus, beyond the letter of the law, not talking about necessarily the letter of the law technically, but really just the idea of being shalom ba'elam, and our role is even with non-Jews that are not our relatives and that are not biologically connected to us, is the idea of bringing a kiddush Hashem, Sheva Mitzvah Zayneyach, teaching them what God wants of them. How much more so with people who have some biological connection that you can't say is completely as if they don't exist. They do exist, and there has to be something, and why not? You can be a positive influence, even as they are, and be a positive influence both as a parent, as a loving person, as a friend, and everything that comes with that a person can be to their biological children. Now, I know this may be sensitive and controversial to some, but this is the way I understand it. And as I said, I would love to hear if anybody has any comments or another way to look at it or anything especially with sources regarding this. And again, I'm talking again about purely l'shevis yitzara aspect of Pashat Tzedek v'Yesher, of being just and righteous and virtuous in this regard. Okay, next question. How to retain bitachon after financial loss? So this is, of course, an issue that many people have. Unfortunately, there are times things go well. A galgal hachezer, as the Rebbe Rashab said, it's a turning wheel. Sometimes we're high up and everything is going well, and sometimes, God forbid, there are setbacks in our business. And many people have the challenge of nisayon of bitachon. The truth is, it's a nisayon for many different areas in life where our trust in God is challenged. So I saw a letter that I thought would be nice to read, and I'll try to read it briefly. But if anybody wants the letter, to actually please email us again. You could send it in to forum at meaningfullife.com/mylife. But remember, please add your email address because that forum is completely anonymous. Without your email address, we can't send you this letter. If you want to read this letter or any other material we quote here, please add your email when you submit you make your submission in that forum. So the Rebbe writes to an individual in London. This is the year Tafshin Chavtes, 5729, an English letter. Greeting and blessing. I have been informed of the loss that has been sustained by your business enterprise, the profits of which were earmarked for Lubavitch House activities, and that this unfortunate occurrence has considerably upset you. While such a reaction is quite understandable, it is necessary not to lose sight of the true Torah perspective. For as with every manner of occurrence and topic, the Torah contains an answer and a definite viewpoint. Indeed, it has often been emphasized that the Torah is eternal, and not simply in regard to the mitzvot, but also in regard to the various narratives in the Torah. And while the events and episodes mentioned in the Torah were all connected with certain persons and certain circumstances in a specific time and place, nevertheless, their message remains eternal and valid for all times and all places with particular relevance, furthermore, to each and every one of us individually. I have in mind the earliest tests and trials which the first Jew, our father Abraham, had to undergo at a time when he was one and alone in his generation. As it is written, one was Abraham. When God said to Abraham, Lech lecha, commanding him to leave his land, his birthplace, and his father's house, it was very difficult for him to do so. Even to sever one of these connections, not to mention all three together. Then Abraham was told to go to a land unknown to him, Canaan, which was later to become Eretz Yisrael, where he was promised he would become great and a source of blessing for all. Yet no sooner did he arrive in that particular land that famine broke out, and with such severity that he had to leave at once and go to Egypt, a journey made undoubtedly with God's approval. Under such circumstances, one might have expected that Abraham would very seriously question divine providence, since it seemed so inconsistent and contradictory. All the more so in view of the statement in Pirkei of the Rabbi Lazar, the Medrash, that the famine affected only the land of Canaan, while all others were spared, something that clearly was intended to test him, Abraham, that is. Yet not only did Abraham not complain, but he also did everything with joy and gladness of heart, bringing his whole family along with him, etc. Of course, it all turned out only to be a test of his Bitachon, his trust in God, for soon afterwards Abraham was richly rewarded, and he returned to Canaan richly laden with cattle, silver, and gold, as the Torah tells us. In reference to these experiences of Abraham, the Medrash states that everything experienced by Abraham was similarly experienced by his children. In light of the above, you ought to consider yourself highly privileged, having, as you do, the zchut, the merit, to be considered worthy of nisyonot tests. Similar to the above, the similarity surely requires no elaboration. I am confident that very soon you too will see the happy conclusion of this test and be richly rewarded with silver and gold in the literal sense too. And all the more so since the profits of this business enterprise have been dedicated to a holy cause. Inasmuch as we will soon celebrate the Yom Tov of Pesach, the festival of our liberation, may God grant that you too should be liberated from all distracting thoughts and be enabled to continue your sacred work in matters of Torah and holiness in general, and activities of Lubavitch and kosher chinuch in particular, and that you may do so with joy and gladness of heart. Wishing you and yours a kosher and happy Pesach with blessing. I think the letter speaks for itself. A powerful letter about the test of Nisayon of Bitachon in the area of Parnasa, and obviously I have nothing to add to it. It speaks for itself. If you want to get the letter, please submit at a form and send us your email address, and I'll be happy to send you the full text of this letter. Next question. Unfulfilled shlucha, should I go to school? Yeah. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I am currently on shlichus and a mother of three small children, K9 Harbour. Unfortunately, I am feeling quite unfulfilled in my life. Being a wife and mother is not doing it for me. Mostly I just feel like a cook and a cleaner both for my family and my community. I am toying with the idea to go to school and get myself a degree in social work so I could be certified to help others with their problems. I've always been fascinated in the field of social work and feel I'm a good fit for the job. The problem is my husband. He doesn't seem keen on the idea and feels I will be taken away from my obligations to my kids and shlichus, and the secular ideas I will learn won't be good for me. I understand his point of view very well, but this feeling of being unfulfilled is gnawing at me and making me sad. What do you suggest? Thank you. Okay, well, as always, I always start with a qualification, every case by case, and without knowing all the details and not knowing what your husband has to say and not knowing all the aspects of your own challenges, it's hard for me to fully answer, particularly because it could very well be that even without going to school, maybe with some creativity, you can find opportunities that's not just a cleaner and a caretaker, but also, as the Rebbe expects from every shlucha, to be an influencer and a leader in her community in the right, modest way, halachically. and it could maybe fulfill exactly that which is that you feel you're good at, which is social work, which is helping people psychologically and personally. And women have very often, much more sensitivity and strength in that particular regard. Does one need to go to school for that? For a degree, yes, but no. But I know people who will go to school and not necessarily great social workers, and I know people who've never gone to school who are brilliant social workers. It has a lot to do with empathy, sensitivity, and real common sense, and your own life experience. So that's why it's hard for me to answer completely, because that could be a very, very viable approach that I just suggested. You could always read things, you could always learn from others, and there's nothing like experience. So that's my general point in general introduction. Specifically, it could be possible, knowing the circumstances, maybe a good idea, an online course or something of that nature. I don't know if you have to necessarily go to school. There are many ways to study and get a degree, if that deems fit, and there's such a consideration. We all know that Rebbe is a position in general about going to school, college, and so on for many reasons. But you're dealing here, which I hopefully would. This is another factor which I'm not aware of. That my belief is you're a true Akeres Habayis, a true Yiddish Shemayim, and a true foundation of your home in a Torah way, in a Chassidish way, and that for you the schooling and the education is simply to be able to do this job well. If indeed that's not the case, God forbid, and I have to say, b'cheskus kashrus, kol yisrael b'cheskus kashrus, I assume that. If it's not the case, that may be another reason, that maybe your husband, or maybe it's not such a wise thing to go to school. But if it's purely to get something, you can do it online. There are many ways to do this. I definitely totally embrace and celebrate that your need and the gnawing need that you should not feel empty, you should not feel unfulfilled, because that's the exact opposite. First of all, b'chlal in general, why a neshama comes down to earth is to fulfill its mission and is given resources to actualize in reality, and especially a shlucha, the Rebbe's shlucha. You are a soldier in the Rebbe's army, which is the whole point of going to a community, wherever you may be, and using your resources to the fullest in influencing and inspiring and teaching and educating Torah, with the light of Torah, the light of Chassidus, which of course includes Chassidus, applying Chassidus, which is the psychological, emotional dimension that actually helps people, whether it's in shalom bayis, domestic affairs, with children, with abuse, with fears, with unfortunately different types of substance abuse and so on, that this is what it's all about. So there's no question that you have to find ways to actualize that, and whatever it takes. So I hope what I just covered is the different segments and different angles of it. In addition, there is a letter that came my way, which may be worthwhile reading. I'll read it as well, because it talks about related issue. But I believe I answered your question, but this letter maybe see it as a supplement or a complement to what I've just said. So it's a letter from Tufshin Lamed Zayin, 5737, Brookline, Massachusetts, greeting and blessing. This is to confirm receipt of your latest correspondence, which is acknowledged ahead of its turn, inasmuch as you have requested an urgent reply. It is rather curious and surprising to see how, in what are quite normal situations, some people will take emergency measures and vice versa. The above remark is apropos of what you write about your daughter. As you surely know, the highest goal of a Jewish woman is to be a successful Akeret Habayit. Akeret Habayit means Akeret, the foundation of the home. And in such a way that all the glory of the king's daughter is within the home. In other words, the true Akeret Habayit takes the greatest possible pride in her home and family. Hence, it is self-evident as to what kind of an education and training a Jewish daughter should receive, and in what areas she should excel. It also follows from the above that a Jewish girl cannot find true fulfillment in a career or profession, any more than a husband can find true fulfillment by being a cook. Although in exceptional cases, there are men who make a career of being a chef. In light of the above, it would certainly be no reflection on the husband to say that he's not clever or smart at preparing tasty dishes, whereas it would reflect on his achievement to say that he's not a good Rosh Hashiva or he is not a good engineer. For it is not the natural order of things that the husband should develop his capacities and qualities in this field to the utmost. You should not therefore belittle the fact that your daughter will be attending a school where emphasis is placed on preparing the girls for a good shidduch and to be a successful Akeret Habayit, for it is in this area in her Jewish home that a Jewish daughter finds true fulfillment and real pride, as mentioned above. As for the theoretical question of what should be done in the case of a boy who shows particular interest and enthusiasm to become a cook, and what in the case of a girl who has special qualities that would make her a good engineer, considering the general principle that all God-given capacities have to be utilized fully, A letter is not the medium to discuss such a problem, especially as it is not relevant to your letter. You see from this clearly, I'm stopping reading further, that the Rebbe definitely gives room for that, though he's specifying what the priority is and the general rule. I hope and pray that you will find the right way to encourage your daughter along the lines mentioned above, to prepare herself to be a true Akeret Habayit, to find real fulfillment therein. If it is true, as you write, that she lacks the special qualities required to become a good engineer, or the like, you surely know that there's a body of scientific opinion that maintains that when a person excels in one area, he or she is likely to be mediocre or even inept in other areas. As a matter of fact, this is perhaps to all good. This is perhaps to all to the good, because if a person excelled in more than one area, he or she would find himself or herself torn in different directions. With reference to your assessment of your achievements in the spreading of Yiddishkeit, I believe I have shared with you before something there that we have often heard from my father-in-law of saintly memory, namely that just as one should not speak Lashon Hara about others, one should not speak Lashon Hara about oneself, speaking negatively about oneself. As a matter of fact, it is often one of the methods of the Yetzer Hara to discourage a person from achieving all that he is capable of, by planting in his mind the idea that he is inadequate and that he is no use, and that is no use trying harder. As a matter of fact, I can now offer you 10 assignments to promote Yiddishkeit, as enumerated in the enclosed general message, which was the 10 Mivtzayim, in which you can achieve a great deal without infringing upon the duties connected with your job engineering, and by utilizing your spare time only. As indicated at the beginning of it, this letter has been sent to you by special delivery, with blessing. Unbelievable letter. Again, if you want to receive this letter, please send us a note, but give us your email address at meaningfullife.com/mylife. Now let's do a few follow-ups to previous episodes. Then we'll do the Chassidus question, and then we shall do the essays, as has been the custom of late. Let's do the addendum to last week's discussion about the Golem of Maharal Prague. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I really enjoy listening to your class every week. I just wanted to make a correction that the Maharal was in the 16th century, not the 18th. I know it seems small, but I feel it's important to be historically accurate. Thank you. Yes, thank you indeed. It may have been a slip tongue, but it is the 16th century, correct. Another commenter writes, on 14th of Shvat, Tavshin Yud, during the Shiva for the Rebbe Rayat, the Rebbe was telling stories of the Rebbe Rayat, since it is not our custom to eulogize. One of the stories printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 2, page 506, I alluded to it a little bit last week, but I didn't spell it out, goes as follows. Here's the translation. The Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe Rayatz once visited the shul of the Maharal Prague in 1908. The Rebbe Rayatz wanted to go up to the attic in which the Golem is to be found, bribed the shamus, took a ladder, and climbed up. When the Rebbe Rayatz recounted this episode, I asked him what he saw up there. There was no reply. That's the Rebbe saying. When the Rebbe Rashab heard about this, he reprimanded his son severely, and after some time told him I had months of work, evidently to forestall any possible ill effects from his going up there. I'll point out that the Ksaviyat from the Rebbe was most certainly written later. Yes, the Ksaviyat that I read was written later. It was published later years, but I'm not sure what year it was written. You can see, right? It is perhaps possible that the Rebbe did not want to say at the time of the eulogy what the Rebbe Rayat told the Rebbe he saw, or perhaps the Rebbe Rayat told him what he saw at a different time. Thanks. There's no contradiction, because the bottom line is, in the Sikh, when the Rebbe told the story, he wanted to see what's there. He didn't answer the Rebbe what was there, but he could have told him later, and maybe more details later. So when it says in the answer that I read last week, it's not a contradiction in any way. Okay, and then there's another thing which I can't say is a totally reliable source, but they say in the name of Rabbi Yunik that he heard from the Rebbe Tzimchana Gerari, Alt Friedrich Rebbe's oldest daughter, the following. I asked my father, meaning the Friedrich Rebbe, to tell me what he had seen there when he went up to the attic. My father paused for a moment and said, when I came up there, the room was filled with dust and shamus. In the center of the room, I could see the form of a man wrapped up and covered. The body was lying on its side. I was very frightened by this sight. I looked around at some of the shamus that were there. Shamus could also mean, not just shamus, could mean the names, God's names. It's not clear what it means. And left frightened by what I had seen. So that's an additional piece in this puzzle. But regardless, we have the witness of the Rebbe, both in the Sikha, in Tavshin Yud, and the note that I read last week, where he said, I myself heard it from the Friedrich Rebbe. and all the details I read last week. Okay, next addendum, yellow flags. Yeah. Reb Simon. I've been a regular, almost every week listener for several years and get a great deal from these classes, especially the deeper in Inyanim and Chassidus. I write this only to provide positive critique. You recently dealt with the Inyan of Mashiach flags. What you said seems to be in conflict with the ideas you present in many other forums. Not in content, but in how you deal with the issue. Was there no way that this could have been spoken about that was not a positive, that would be a positive, instructive lesson for all? For example, could you have not said, true, it is Reshut, because I spoke about Reshut being something that's not forbidden, not something not the mitzvah, but it's permissible. It's neutral. And true, I don't wear this flag, which I also don't. But there is something positive to take from this. Not everyone you meet on the street is ready to fully imbibe all the Inyanim of Mashiach via intellect, which you, like myself, might prefer. Some open up through music, some via questions about the flag, others from other means. But if you do wear a flag, you're likely to deal with the Inyan of Mashiach more. Can we truly say that every week of Chassidus Applied leaves one wanting to know more about Mashiach? I personally can't say that. When I talk to folks, I keep it on the top of the list. Excuse me. The flag might be not my way, but I can respect those who make themselves a target for having to deal with the issue. Now, in this manner, we don't run the risk of overgeneralizing and saying that as a party or a political movement. We can find something to be envious of, and we need to find mechanisms that can do this perhaps without the flag. I don't see the positive message when one questions the motives, even if you are correct, in those who wear the flag. And we see the results of the activity in the mail you get. It rouses the anger, passions on both sides. Was there not a positive lesson that could have been brought out? Final note, on all of these hot flashpoints about Mashiach, I remember the following story Rabbi Buket told me about his father, Rabbi Chaim Buket. During the time of the Central Committee of Aguch was purging anyone who might have a whiff of Mashiachist tendencies from Aguch, Rabbi Chaim Buket, a member of Aguch, was not favorable to these purges. They approached him, but he did not agree with them. So they said, well, he's from the Polish Chassidim. If he was Russian, he would have be more of a kanoi like us Russian Chassidim, more of a zealot. To which he replied, I am a kanoi, but a kanoi for Avos Yisrael. I am a zealot, I'm a zealot for Avos Yisrael. Okay, good story. I read your comment. I have no comment on your comment. I stand by what I've said, and I think I covered it pretty thoroughly, but I like to read everything that comes this way, as long as it fits in the right parameters and it's not offensive. So I read what you wrote, and everybody take it as they see fit. Good. There's some more follow-ups, but because of time limitations, I will do, let me see. Okay, we'll stop here with the follow-ups. I will do the Chassidus question, and then we'll do the essays. Okay. Again, any follow-ups that have not been covered will be covered in the future week, the next week, or in the following weeks. Any questions that you've submitted, and there are many waiting to be responded to, rest assured they will be covered in the coming weeks. It's just that there's a real backlog because I just can't cover them all, and I will cover them, so do not feel dejected. And please continue sending your questions in, and your comments, and your rebuttals, and everything you'd like to share. The more lively, the better. Okay. The Chassidus question for the week is a question on Iggeres Hakodesh in Tanya, epistle, as they call it, 11, Yud Aleph. Iggeres Hakodesh, Yud Aleph. And here's the question. Rabbi Jacobson, thanks for all the great work you do. In Tanya Iggeres Hakodesh 11, it says that for one who truly believes in all worldly matters, in Yon Ha'elam, yes and no are truly equally desirable outcomes. And he explains why, because everything comes from Hashem. So for a person who truly is connected, anything worldly matters is a worldly matter that's run by God. So it's equal whether it's a positive thing that happens or a negative. In this context, worldly matters means matters connected with children, health, and livelihood, as he explicitly states in Iggeres Hakodesh. I understand, the questioner writes, that matters of my health and livelihood are determined by Hashem. So therefore I have to accept and understand it's God's hand no matter what the outcome is. So whatever happens in these areas must be a good thing. However, when my children have bad values and do Averis, sins, that causes me a lot of pain as a parent, but these events occur due to their free choice, and it's not Hashem's deed. So how can I say about such events that it comes from Hashem, so it must be good? Thank you. Okay, very good question. And in general, just the Iggeres Hakodesh is a very interesting, unique one. Laskil Chabina, it's called, which means to add wisdom to those that have Bina. And it talks about that the way to have God rest among you is not to lig and not to be consumed with Chaim Psarim, with life of flesh. And he says, what is life of flesh? The things of survival. Exactly that, livelihood, health, children, family, and so on. Which immediately elicits a question that's similar in chapter 9 in Iggeres Hakodesh, where he says that we shouldn't just do things for our children and our families. Why not? Isn't that the chinuch? The Rebbe Rashab says that just like it's a mitzvah to put on tefillin every day, it's a mitzvah to think about your children and about your wife and think about the chinuch of your family every day. So obviously the Alter Rebbe can't be referring to chinuch, which is a mitzvah sesa d'oraisa, according to most opinions. And such a foundation in Yiddishkeit, to make sure your children, to bring them up in the right way. He's talking about the Gashmi is that your whole life is about making money and giving your children physical security and physical shelter, which you need to do, but it's a means to a higher end. So we're not talking about the mitzvah of educating your children, we're talking about being consumed, that your whole life is not about any spiritual goals and not anything about God's purpose, it's about taking care of you and your family as an extension of your own flesh. So first of all, we're talking about that aspect. We're not talking about children, God forbid, doing something wrong, which is of course your responsibility, and you should try to do anything possible to correct it. We're talking about being consumed with the gashmius of your children as an end in itself. Even gashmius you have to do. You're obligated to give bonachai mezena. You have to give seder ksusa ve'nosik seder ksusa to a wife and to children. Your father is responsible. Parents are responsible to provide shelter, to provide clothing, to provide food, but not to be consumed as an end in itself, which is all about survival, like animals. Also do that. They're responsible and so on. To elevate it to a ruchnistic thing, like he explains in this Epistle 11. Additionally, when you read it, you see that it's definitely, it says, Laskil Chabina, Loshen Yachid. Because this section, this piece in Iggeres Hakodesh is definitely referring to Yechidus Gula. Everyone's capable of reaching it, but it's not an easy thing, because he's saying literally that not to be consumed with Chaim Psarim. Most of us are consumed, and we try to refine it, as the Rebbe in his notes on the Iggeres Hakodesh says, what does it mean? He's being shell, you shouldn't have Chaim Psarim. You need Laskil Chabina for that. That in other words, we shouldn't be consumed with life of flesh and blood, physical materialism. The Rebbe says, no, because there could be the Havamina, that the whole kavanah is that you should be involved in the materialism, in iskafia. Through iskafia, you bring godliness down. Comes this Iggeres Hakodesh, says not just iskafia, that you have to actually feel that everything in Gashmis comes from Hashem. So bottom line, the answer is, we're not talking about children's behavior and children's in that way. We're talking about their physical lives. Additionally, even if you're going to talk about so-called children, there is a certain equality. Once they have free will, it's beyond your control after your education. So there's a certain acceptance that you accept, which may be a very healthy thing, that we can't control our children. And we accept that it's coming from a greater and higher place. Let's now do the essays, 3 essays, wonderful essays. I really, really enjoyed reading them. And I will recommend you read these essays. The essays are available as they are posted every week. New essays are posted from last year's contest. meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we send out an email. So just feel free to subscribe and get interesting material, including reminders, by the way, of MyLife can also be sent by email. Podcasts are available usually within a day after the program. You can download it. And people have also asked about the timestamps. I say it again, you don't need to listen to the entire hour or hour and 10 minutes or hour and 15 minutes, even though I'd be honored if you did. But you don't need to listen. There's timestamps. You go to the YouTube, click on the video, you'll see the YouTube has below timestamps, which by subject you can click on literally and say, okay, here's the section I want to hear about the Chassidus question, I want to hear about the yellow flags, I want to hear about the Maral, I want to hear about ultrasound, and you can just click and just go straight and jump there. And it's all posted, and you can find every episode has that, besides the fact that you can also search by keywords or topics you're looking for. The first of these three essays is called Living with the Times by Leah Ali, age 20, Brooklyn, New York. I would highly recommend reading this essay. Found it to be a creative, personal, and really touching. It's written, structured around the 5 Chumoshim, Bereshis, Shmeis, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim, in the personal life of this Leah. And she writes, in the beginning I didn't know what it meant that I was Jewish, let alone know what Chassidus was. I didn't know whether I had inherited the greatest gift. Growing up in a secular family, this was my reality. Nevertheless, I wouldn't trade my past for anything. Hashem put me in my specific family with all my challenges for a reason. Through this I learned so much, gained strength in every way, and became who I am. As the Baal Shem Tov says, a descent is for a greater ascent. Today I can happily say I'm climbing my way up on the ascending ladder towards doing Hashem's will and becoming a better Jew, as we all are. Although looking back, I can't begin to imagine the dull and strenuous climb it would be without the light of Chassidus. And goes on speaking about her personal journey, how her journey toward a meaningful Jewish life may not have occurred if Chassidus didn't be part of it. Begins with Bereshis, her beginning, which is descent for an ascent. Moves on to Shmeis, and she says, I was enslaved to a secular life for 18 years. And explains how Shmeis plays itself out in her personal life. And the context of Shmeis being names, a Jewish name that she discovered her name was Leah. And then she moves on, in detail, describes the whole, like Yetzias Mitzrayim, that she personally went through. Then she comes to Vayikra, and she says, and he called, meaning Hashem called, and he called Machon Alta. She describes her discovery of Machon Alta in Eretz Yisrael, which was her call from God that gave her the ability to continue her journey. And then the next is Bamidbar. I was living in a modern day Geula. And then finally, Dvarim, the Rebbe spoke many words. Ela Dvarim asher dibra Moshe. How the Rebbe's words transformed her life. I found it to be extremely interesting and creative and personal, and really applying Chassidus in a very, very personal way. The reason I would assume that the judges do not choose this from the top 10 is because it doesn't necessarily have an idea in Chassidus per se that is developed and applied, but it's the general spirit. But from a personal application point of view, it's up there, my opinion, and I definitely recommend you reading it. So thank you for that. Excellent essay. Next essay is Avoiding Failure by Mendy Gollub, age 20, Long Beach, California. Look at these ages. Man alive. I wish I was at age 20 writing such essays. What can I say? Okay, Mendy Gollub writes, nobody likes failure. It's heartbreaking to really want something and put in effort and still not reach your goal. However, if you look in Chassidus, it lays out a formula for success. In Chassidus, we find instruction for how to properly invest ourselves in something in a way that we will never taste failure. In order to understand how to properly go about achieving our goals, we first need to understand how the Golem vessels work. Goes into a whole intellectual Haskalah discussion on the Inyan of Golem by the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, and the Hagos of the Mitteler Rebbe Rashab and Pasach Eliyahu, which surprised me that really gone to one of the heaviest and deepest concepts of Chassidus, but does a very good job of explaining it in very practical terms, what Golem and their role is, and applying it to our lives, in our successes, and how we ultimately focus and what we focus on as we grow in our personal lives. I found this essay also very interesting and very creative with practical applications. There was one more quote I wanted to bring, I don't know if it was in this essay, but this essay as well is a great essay to read, and thank you for that as well, with nice sources. And finally, essay number 3, Jungle or Garden, by Talya Portnoy, age 19, Bal Harbour, Florida. We are living in a time where man desires an inner peace, which will extend into every area of his or her life. People are constantly searching for self-contentment, for tips on overcoming challenging times, and for a purpose in life. A study which was done on college students showed how 76% of college students, quote, are searching for meaning and purpose in their life, end quote. It goes on to describe people from how religion does this, how people are seeking in all kinds of places the key to themselves, the key to happiness, the key to a purpose. Yet they are missing the fundamental understanding of who they truly are. As the Jewish nation, we have the answer. The Chassidic book called Tanya addresses all of these issues in an organized fashion. She goes on to go and explain that. Again, very well applied, and in understanding how from Chassidus we actually come to find this type of purpose and realize that the world is not a jungle but a garden. And with that, we conclude the essays for this week, and we conclude this episode of MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 190, on the night of Tes Kislev, the Mitteler Rebbe's birthday, and histalkus, 190 years ago, leading right into the Geula of Yud Kislev. May it be a Chedesh HaGeula, may it be a week of Geula, may it be a Geula Nitzchis forever, Geula Amitis Vashlema, and our efforts in applying Chassidus on an ongoing basis in our personal lives is what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov is the key to Osimar Dal Malka Mashiach through Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza. We're here every Sunday from 8 to 9 p.m. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 190. Everyone have a Geula Dika week.